Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The honourable member for Miramichi-Grand Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today we are asking the House to declare the Prime Minister convene a carbon tax emergency meeting with all First Ministers. This meeting must address the ongoing carbon tax crisis and the financial burden it places on Canadians. The Prime Minister's recent 23% increase, plans for provinces to opt out of the federal carbon tax, pursue other responsible ideas to lower emissions. Given that the government's current environmental plan, Canada now ranks 62nd out of 67 countries on the Climate Change Performance Index. And this meeting will be publicly televised and held within 5 weeks of this motion being adopted. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister just doesn't understand that if you tax the farmer who grows the food and the trucker who then ships it, you end up taxing the family that purchases it. Then you put the burden on Canadian citizens, and that's exactly what this government continues to do. That's why 70% of Canadians and 70% of provincial premiers oppose the carbon tax increase. 3 premiers even warned Liberals in Ottawa personally that the latest carbon tax increase will push Canadians over the edge. I will let my good friend from Coast of Bays Centre Notre Dame highlight what it means for the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, who was the Prime Minister's campaign chair when he ran for leader, to call for this emergency meeting with all premiers. Premier Andrew Furey must be worried. I'm told things are so bad for the Liberals in Newfoundland and Labrador that in a recent by-election, and another underway as we speak, the Liberal provincial governments are not even calling themselves Liberals anymore on their own lawn signs. That's a rarity in the country, probably especially for Newfoundland. And they're not even using the colour red, Madam Speaker, which the Liberals have owned since the Lester Pearson era in the 1960s, after the red maple leaf flag was adopted. Madam Speaker, over the past 2 weeks while I've been back in Miramichi-Grand Lake, everyone I ran into wanted to talk about 3 things. Obviously the eclipse, where to best watch it, but more importantly, the affordability crisis hammering people and the negative impact of the inflationary carbon tax. Many of you may have seen the sad story out of Gagetown, New Brunswick, home to Canada's largest army base, but now a place where 40 to 50 military families a week visit the local food bank just to feed their kids. Gagetown Food Bank usage has doubled, with more and more seniors not able to feed themselves either. A Canadian food charity recently reported this year they expect 1 million additional visits to food banks just in 2024, after record-breaking visits in 2023, including 2 million in just a single month last year. New Brunswickers are being forced to choose between filling up their cars, heating their homes, and feeding their families. Last week on April 1st, New Brunswickers woke up to the world's worst April Fool's joke as the NDP-Liberal coalition hiked the carbon tax by 23%. This is just the next step in their disastrous plan to quadruple the carbon tax over the next 6 years, making everything more expensive for everyone in our country. Even worse, the New Brunswick Energy and Utilities Board invoked their interrupter clause the very next day, spiking gas prices another 8 cents a litre overnight. So you can imagine the hurt in New Brunswick. So after the NDP-Liberal coalition's carbon tax increase, the maximum price for a litre of regular self-serve gas in New Brunswick was $1.75. The next morning, it was $1.83 per litre. It's painful every time a New Brunswicker fills up their tank. Last week's April Fool's tax hike makes it clear, though, that Canadians will experience no relief so long as the NDP-Liberal coalition is in power. Madam Speaker, during the Easter break, I also went to Prince Edward Island in search of the famous subway in Charlottetown. The Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister told Islanders they should use along with their bicycles instead of driving their carbureted cars to work. Lo and behold, Madam Speaker, I couldn't find a subway in Prince Edward Island. And I drove around and I actually looked for it. I thought I might have missed something over the years. But I sure found a lot of upset farmers and truckers. And do you know what one trucking company told me? This is a company that has over 100 trucks on the road. Now, I want people in this house to really listen to this example, and if you're listening at home, this will give you a little insight into the long-term plan. These trucking companies have been told that by 2035, they're all supposed to be changed to electric transports. Hear me out here. An electric transport costs $250,000 more right now than the transports they're using. So imagine getting, another 9 years in this country, how much that price is going to go up. For potato growers, processors, and shippers, it really is a tax on a tax on a tax. The average farmer is now paying $150,000 a year on what they call the weather tax on the island. I remember being an energy critic in New Brunswick a few years back, probably back in 2014, 15, 16, those years. I had been kind of like the understudy for the previous energy minister, and it was said at the time that it would take 80 to 90 years to even make an honest effort to get off of fossil fuels in this country. That statistic was researched, and that was from 2014. 2014, we thought it was going to take 100 years to get off fossil fuels, and that was like pushing it. And here we are here, 10 years later, and people now can understand why this radical ideology is costing them. They can't afford to live anymore. This ideology doesn't make sense. Canada is fueled by oil and gas. The world knows it. We're inventors in that category. We develop it better than anybody else. We refine it better than anybody else. We have the best labor laws. We have the best environmental standards. We literally are #1 around the globe for that. So it's a very shameful attempt by this government to try and rewrite history. The notion the NDP-Liberal coalition can tax the weather to bring down greenhouse gas emissions is a falsehood. Trying to encourage residents in Miramichi-Grand Lake to transition away from gas-powered cars and trucks is foolhardy. I represent a large, mostly rural district, but it does include the city of Miramichi. According to the Change Finder website, there are 3 charging stations in Miramichi, one at Community College, one at Northumberland Mall, and then another one near City Hall. These are facts. There are 3 charging stations for more than 57,000 people that live in amongst that basin, including the outskirts of the city. That math does not add up, Madam Speaker. That doesn't even make sense for anybody. The response from the Prime Minister that there's no need for an emergency meeting since he already convened one with premiers in 2016 is simply ridiculous. Do you find it a bit odd, Madam Speaker, that not only was that meeting 8 years ago, none of the people who are now serving as premiers were in office at that time? So this is an entirely new slate of First Ministers that the Prime Minister is ignoring, while 70% of them, plus and growing, disagree with him. The NDP-Liberal coalition must listen to Canada's premiers who are calling for an emergency meeting on the carbon tax. On this side of the House, Conservatives will work with Canada's premiers to bring home lower prices for all Canadians. I know in Miramichi-Grand Lake, everywhere I go, I hear the hurt that it's causing people. We used to have a median household income of $34,000. That stat would be a few years old now. You can imagine a rural area like mine, how hard this is hitting people. Our leader has been clear since day one, Madam Speaker. Only common sense Conservatives will bring home lower prices and axe the tax on everything for everyone for good. And Madam Speaker, I think Canadians are finally realizing, despite all the hurt, that there's actually hope in this country. The hope in this country is that our leader, the honourable leader from the riding of Carleton, has shown time and time again that he sees the hurt the Liberal policies are causing Canadians. And he wants to put policies in place to have more money on your paycheck. We shouldn't be paying this. I remember when I was in the island, they asked me, media, CBC of course, so if you axed the tax, would you axe the rebate? And I looked at him and I said, well, there would be no need for a rebate if we weren't taxing the citizens. And then I had to remind him that the parliamentary budget officer said people in the island were losing at least $400 or more per month after achieving a rebate. Anyway, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak on this. The Prime Minister needs to listen. He needs to convene this meeting and stop hurting Canadians. Thank you.